Yeah, I'm not the best person to actually articulate these ideas or be super knowledgeable on it. It's more of like a felt sense, like I said, going to many Baptist churches, some Pentecostal churches are in related to that theology and do bring in people to do like seders and so but I think on that part, like the cultural part for me, like how can you as a Christian separate yourself from the Old Testament narrative? You just can't. And so it's like
but there's also something funny, right? Because the Seder, for instance, develops over about a millennium. And there's an early version that's happening, certainly, in the Second Temple period, in the time of Jesus. In fact, maybe not even it's not even the earliest version. There's earlier versions than that. But it's like an evolving thing. When Christians do a Seder now, they take the modern rabbinic Seder, basically, and they modify it slightly, maybe, to kind of make sure it matches the New Testament.
Yeah, with Christ.
But just like a little bit. And mostly they're just kind of trusting the rabbinic tradition and also all the developments since then. And they're retrojecting it back into what they think of as Second Temple Judaism. This also is a big problem with The Chosen, right? The Chosen, when it and I've only seen a couple clips, but people would send me clips asking me like, hey, is this real? And I'm like, well, that is what we do now, but it was definitely not what they did,
I see what
you're 30. And it is kind of this weird thing where Judaism is both like sort of this imagined thing for Christianity, right? It's like, I mean, especially the New Testament, like it's a kind of, we imagine what the Pharisees are like or the Sadducees are like. And then of course, Christianity also had lots of myths about Jews through many, many centuries. And lots of opinions about them, even though most Christians would never have met a Jew. And at the same time, for those who do meet Jews, they that is their only reference point. So then they use that to retroject back this image into what they think the New Testament was actually talking about. And that's so complicated and weird. And it's like playing an imagination space, but it's an imagination space about me, right? In some sense, but it's not really about me, right? What's weird, right? The Vikings had myths about Jews that we appear in the sagas and the Eddas, even though there were no Jews in Viking lands, except for when the Vikings came down to Baghdad. Maybe a couple of them met Jews at some point, or Turkey, but it was pretty darn rare for us to cross paths. And yet Iceland knows the Jews, even though no Jew had set foot in Iceland until, after World War I, I think. And it's this weird thing where there's just, the Jew exists more in the imagination of Christianity than exists as a real person. And I think that's kind of also what's happening around Zionism and all these conversations. It's very easy to talk about Jews and around Jews, and even talk to Jews who are atheists and not affiliated with anything, but hey, they descend from Jews, so they somehow have some spiritual, I don't even know what to call it, zeitgeist somehow is in their, that's not the right word, Volk, right? They have some folk, blood connection to Judaism, therefore they can talk about Judaism. And maybe, they're still Jews, they can have an opinion, but it's weird how we don't engage. And this is, I think, my big thing around Voice. If I was going to get to that conversation more directly, is he was talking about the gatekeepers, and the gatekeepers, honestly, I found the conversation I found his thought in the conversation a little confusing, because he both said the gatekeepers want to reach these young men, but he also gave examples of them not wanting to reach these young men. And then he was talking about whether that everything is, should be around dialogue and fraternity and all these things. And that means making sure we engage with this group of young men who are at the forefront of creativity and all of these positive attributes he ascribes to them. And at the same time, it didn't really sound like Jews were to be part of that conversation, or it would be worth sacrificing dialogue with Jews in order to have to have the dialogue with these young men, to some degree. And insofar as the gatekeepers are Jews or influenced by Jews, which certainly he implies throughout that conversation, it feels weird. Obviously there's also differences of Jews who have influence over conversations, and me in the corner who has very no no influence. But like,
your influence
not in the way that he means as gatekeepers of politics.
Sure, right. No,
like
but
I'm so outside of this world.
A certain version of influence, just by, like you said, like we all become representatives on some level of like, oh, you're have a relationship with being Presbyterian. There's not very many people that are talking. Most people are doing the Catholic and Orthodox. So, oh, you're the arbiter of this conversation now, and it's like, well, I mean, I'm probably not the best version, but or like there's not that many black people. It's like if you're black, oh, you're
representing. Yeah,
I think my point there is that we actually the problem is that there hasn't actually been a way to articulate that from some kind of Anglos perspectives, like the liberal perspectival thing is like, it's almost like the critique that Vervaeke makes on science about there's no view from nowhere. I feel like the white liberal pretends like they have a view from nowhere in a sense, in a kind of way that has to actually be acknowledged and integrated to be able to say, no, I'm actually bringing this perspective.
Yeah, to some degree. I think it's different because Vance is actually a great example of this. The books that were about perspectives from Appalachia that came out and they were like embraced pretty wholeheartedly by, I would say, like the liberal elites as like, look, great diversity of voices. Or even, Haight was doing these interviews in South Philly and Fishtown, right? Like these were white communities. They were not defined necessarily by like, they may not even said they were white first in their definition of themselves, but like they were, they were defined kind of geographically and kind of dialectically and socioeconomically more than they were. So like, I feel we can get like a little too caught up in like a very like strict ethnic like kind of framing, whereas, and I know Boyce didn't like when he was like, oh, well, we have this like amorphous like broader concept of ethnicity with like the British language, I think was his example. I think that's actually like a really great example of like, yes, there are forged identities where, because to some degree, I mean, it's also one of my hobbies is genealogy. Like America like has a lot of people who have lots of different genetic, backgrounds and mixes. And that's especially true within kind of white Americans who come, will have German and Scandinavian and English and Irish heritage.
I've got one for you.
Yeah.
Okay. My dad, and this is crass, bastard Korean half-breed, was rejected by his country because he was a product of the Korean War. He's half Korean, put into an orphanage, adopted to a tiny town through a Methodist Christian agency. My mom we can easily trace our identity. George Washington is my second cousin, 7 generations removed. Awesome. Like, you don't get more like,
there you go. So, but then you need something that's broader and not quite as specific, unless you happen to be in one of these really homogenous enclaves in the upper Midwest still, that's really still Scandinavian, or really like there's still a couple like German towns that still exist. Yeah. For the most part, this identity has diffused, and therefore it needs a broader kind of story or frame, and it might be socioeconomic or dialect or my geographic, so it's going to be, Southern Appalachia or whatever it is. And that's going to be the catchment. And like, I don't think that's necessarily like, I don't want to dismiss that as like a real identity. I mean, it is a real identity, and it's one that people have been using in this country for a while, and one that even was recognized by the white liberal view from nowhere as its own identity. Yes, there's still a certain like elitist, I would say, kind of coastal, like view from nowhere version of, I don't even know if I would call it a white identity. It's just like an identity that transcends, it's both in theory, race, right? And given the pretty mixed demographics of, let's say, the elite institutions of the coasts, and the cosmopolitanism of the coasts, like I wouldn't actually say it's even an ethnic identity. And in some ways, like there's an idea that this, because it is formed of this mix, not socioeconomic mix and not geographic mix, but specifically a mix of race and skills and to some degree.